Hi folks, it's Pastor Russ. We are up to Good Friday in our weekly devotional of the days of Holy Week. We're now to the last hours that Jesus spent on earth before he died on the cross. We continued from Holy Thursday. As you can see, we're still in the sanctuary, and I'm recording this right after that. So if you haven't gotten a chance to listen to the one with Holy Thursday, please go back through it, because as I said in that video, the events of Holy Thursday flow right into Good Friday. It's one continuous series of events. As I said, the previous one, Wednesday night, was the last night Jesus would have a restful night on earth. When we get to Thursday, there's no sleep Thursday night into Friday, and the events just continue right through the events of the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then flow right into what happened on Good Friday. And that's what we want to look at now. We left off the other devotional talking about Judas betraying Jesus and Jesus being arrested by the large group that came to get him in the dead of night in the Garden of Gethsemane. And by now it was probably after midnight, so the way we count the passage of time, it's now very early Friday morning. First of all, Jesus is taken before Annas, who was the former high priest of the Jews, and he was actually the father-in-law of the current high priest, Caiaphas. Yes, they did keep it in the family as best they could to maintain power and wealth. The high priestly office was a political one as well as a religious one, let's be honest. But the first stop that they make is to bring him before Annas to be examined. Now that's John chapter 18, verses 13 through 24, is his first informal trial before Annas. And then shortly after that, or during that time, Peter's first denial happens, the first time he denies the Lord is while this is going on. Now, after that informal hearing or trial concludes, Jesus is taken to Caiaphas' house, the high priest, for a more formal trial. And that's John 18:24, Matthew 26:57-68, Mark 14:53-65, and Luke 22:54. So all four Gospels are now recording his presence before Caiaphas. Peter followed the procession there from the distance, and he denied Jesus for the second time while this phase was going on. That's John 18:25. So while all of this is happening to Jesus, we get a brief glimpse as to what's happening with at least Peter in showing that what Jesus predicted actually did happen, that he did deny him 3 times. So Jesus has his trial before Caiaphas. Now, as these continue, they're getting more intense, more formal, more serious. And I won't go through all the details about what happened at every one of those. You can read through those from those passages. There's just not enough time in this devotional to cover everything that happened. But remember, these people are resolute. Jesus must die. He is a blasphemer. He is going to help bring about the destruction of Israel, because the Romans won't tolerate his sedition, and his followers need to be scattered, dispersed, or also eliminated. So there's no trial in the sense of that it's a fair hearing. This is a meeting to formally condemn him and nothing else. But they had to go through these procedures so they couldn't be accused of violating the law and just doing mob justice, even though that's what happened. So the third phase, Jesus is put on trial before the Sanhedrin. Now that is the Jewish Supreme Court, so to speak, the Jewish council of all the leaders of both the religion and civil leaders in Israel. They were the people who basically were calling the shots. Still under Rome's authority, but they controlled what happened both in the religion and in the civil society in Israel, and especially in Jerusalem. So the Sanhedrin is called, and they have a trial with him. Matthew 27:1, Mark 15:1, and Luke 22:66 to 71. And this is the most formal of what has happened so far, because it's the Sanhedrin who can render the verdict. Now, it's been suggested that not all the members of the Sanhedrin were there, especially Jesus' supporters. It's also been suggested that what they did violated their own laws and regulations, because this is happening in the middle of the night. Remember, it's after midnight when he's arrested and he's taken to these various places. This is still the middle of the night that all of this is going on. So the Jews were so vehement in their hatred for Jesus, the Jewish leadership, that they were willing to break their own rules in order to get him removed from their society. And it's tragic that it came to that, but that's what God wanted ultimately. You know, they had condemned themselves. Jesus has already pronounced the woes on them, and now it just has to play out. There's no turning back now. It's moving forward the way it's supposed to. While he is at this third trial before the Sanhedrin, Peter denies him for the third time. And then a rooster crows. John 18:26 and 27. So what Jesus told him at the Last Supper had actually now come to pass, and 3 times Peter denied Jesus to those who were accusing him, out of fear, out of dread as to what could happen if he was caught and dragged away like Jesus was. Now, after the Sanhedrin makes their decision that he needs to be executed, Jesus is led to the Roman governor, Pilate. Matthew 27:2, Mark 15:1, Luke 23:1, and John 18:28. Again, this is still well before dawn. I am sure that Pilate was none too thrilled about being woken that early in the morning and having to deal with this problem going on in Jerusalem. Pilate was the Roman governor, so he was the ultimate authority in the land. The local rule had been so botched by Herod's descendants that Rome stepped in and appointed a governor directly, and Pontius Pilate was the one who was there. I'm sure he was not thrilled about being there. Jerusalem was not the center of the Roman Empire. It was not the most glamorous job to have, but he did what he was supposed to do as a Roman bureaucrat. And he was the justice there, and he had the force of the Roman legions behind him to make sure that Roman law was followed. So he was, in a sense, judge, jury, and executioner. Now, around this time, when he is with Pilate, it's thought that Judas realized what he had done and felt remorse. He's realizing that if Jesus is turned over to the Romans, he's going to be killed. Judas wasn't wanting Jesus to be killed. He just wanted him to stop doing what he was doing because he disagreed with him. Judas felt remorse and tried to give the money back to the chief priests. And of course, they refused to do that. That's the price of blood. We can't take the money back. It's now unclean. And when that failed to change things, he went away and he hanged himself. And that's Matthew 27:3 through 10. So Jesus has his first trial before Pilate, John 18:28 to 38. And after Pilate questions him for a bit, Pilate sees a way out and he says, well, you're from Galilee, so therefore you're really not under my jurisdiction, because Israel was divided into a few different geographical regions, and there still was one of Herod's descendants ruling over the Galilee region. He would have been Jesus' sovereign, so to speak, if you want to call it that. So Pilate says, well, look, I'll send you to Herod. He may know what to do with you. I won't have to deal with it. So Pilate sends Jesus to Herod, king of the Galilee region of Israel. Herod is in town for the Passover. Normally he wouldn't have been there, but he has a palace in the capital city. Of course, being one of the rulers of the nation of Israel, they would have catered to him. Luke 23, 6 through 12 describes Jesus' visit to Herod. Jesus refuses to even talk with Herod. Herod is just incompetent, basically. He's not sure what's all going on, but he finally gets frustrated and bored with Jesus, and he sends him back to Pilate saying, I don't know what you want me to do with this guy. So Jesus comes back to Pilate, and he now has his second trial before Pilate. Pilate wants to declare him innocent, but the crowds won't have it. He couldn't understand what horrible thing Jesus had done that he should be executed. Now, it's not that Pilate cared about Jesus or that he was a compassionate man, but he was a politician, and he realized that if he didn't have a legitimate charge to put him to death, then he could be criticized as being a bad ruler. Oh, Pilate, you're supposed to follow Roman law. Well, you didn't follow Roman law in executing Jesus. What are you doing? So he was trying to get out of having to pronounce the death sentence just because the things they were trying to accuse Jesus of were trivial in his mind. Jesus didn't lead an armed insurrection. He wasn't a terrorist that was killing Roman soldiers. His followers weren't part of the zealot movement in the sense that they were out, terrorizing the Roman authorities. So what did he do that was so bad? They didn't accuse him of being a robber or a thief or a murderer or rapist or anything like that. So why would he want to put Jesus to death? There was no reason. Finally, Pilate decides to have Jesus scourged to placate the crowds. And he's severely beaten, of course, by the Romans. We've heard about the scourging and seen representations of it. Obviously, it was a horrible punishment. But Pilate probably thought, okay, if I do this at least, then they'll be placated. They'll be satisfied that he was punished for his crimes, so to speak. Now, the other thing, too, in the back of Pilate's mind is that, well, if I do have to crucify him, by scourging him, he'll be physically weaker, so he won't take as long to die. Pilate understood that the Jews were having their high holy days and was not wanting to have the criticism of, bodies lying around when they're trying to have these times of ceremony. When Jesus is brought back after the scourging, Pilate says, okay, listen. Every year in the Passover, I show how generous and charitable I am. I offer to you, the people of Jerusalem, a chance to have one prisoner released to you, and in a sense pardoned. So I'm going to give you a choice. Do you want Jesus? And he thought that they'd choose him. Or Barabbas, who was a rabble-rouser and a murderer and a thief and just a despicable individual. Well, the Jews chose Barabbas because that's how much they hated Jesus. There was nothing about Barabbas that the Jewish religious leadership could point to and say, he's an okay guy, because he had violated the Jewish law upside down, sideways, in 60 different ways too, with all of his crimes. He didn't blaspheme against God, but he violated all these other things with his violence and his murders and things like that. But they still decided that he was the lesser of two evils, so they chose him to be released. And since Pilate made the offer, he couldn't go back on it now. Okay, you've chosen Barabbas, here he is. Then he says, all right, what do we do with Jesus? And they responded, he needs to be crucified. And the religious leaders whipped up the crowds that were now present watching this hearing going on at Pilate's judgment hall. And they began chanting, "Crucify him." Probably some of the same people that were along the roads on Palm Sunday when he came in, shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." This is how fickle they were, and Jesus knew that. So Pilate orders Jesus to be crucified, and he washes his hands symbolically of the matter, saying, "It's his blood's on you. You wanted this. I'm not responsible." Obviously he was, but it was a symbolic way for him to say, don't blame me for what happens. So Jesus is then led out to Golgotha or Calvary. And there are lots of details about that we could get into, with the crown of thorns and carrying the cross, or the cross being helped with the cross by Simon the Cyrene, and the times that he fell, and so on. But he reaches the place of the skull, Golgotha, Calvary, and he is put on the cross. He's nailed to the cross around 9 a.m. Again, they didn't have watches or clocks, but approximately said the third hour of the day, so that would have been 9 a.m. Jesus is on the cross from 9 until 3, 6 hours of horrible agony, horrible suffering, horrible just pain, and the body revolting against what's happening to it. And that doesn't even include any of the spiritual battles he's fighting, taking on the sins of the world and realizing he's got to pay for everything we've done. We're told that darkness covered the land from noon until about 3, a darkness that wasn't normal or natural. It wasn't simply a solar eclipse. It wasn't simply just a cloudy day. It was something that went beyond the natural realm. It was all nature showing the horrors of what was happening. Finally, by around 3 p.m., Jesus says, "It is finished," and he bows his head and he dies. He has completed his task. He said the things from the cross that he needed to say. He received the one criminal that he was crucified with into the kingdom because the man repented. And he put his responsibility for Mary's care onto John, since he wouldn't be there anymore. And we know that there are sermon series about Jesus' 7 last words from the cross, where the various things he said could be discussed too, but you can read through those too in the accounts. All 4 accounts obviously have the crucifixion. When Jesus dies, when he says it is finished, a violent earthquake shakes the ground, and the veil in the temple rips from top to bottom. Now, in the Jewish temple, the innermost section was known as the Holy of Holies. That's the place where God's presence was supposed to live. That's where the Ark of the Covenant used to be. There wasn't any by Jesus' day because it was gone after the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in the 6th century BC. But it was still considered the holy place, and only one person one day a year was allowed to go in there, the high priest, to sprinkle the blood. And what separated that room from the next compartment out in the temple, the holy place where the priests would do their ministry and offering incense offerings and so on, and prayer, was a very thick curtain. Some people think it may have been as much as 6 inches thick, so that no light and no noise could escape that room, because no one was allowed in God's presence and could live. The veil separated sinful man from a holy God. But when Jesus died, that separation was now gone. Now we all have access to a holy God because of Jesus' blood, Jesus' forgiveness. So the tearing of the veil from top to bottom was God's way of showing humanity, okay, now you don't have to be separate from me anymore. In fact, Hebrews says the new veil is Jesus' own flesh. We go through him to get to God. So that was part of what happened when Jesus died with the violent earthquake. Also, the Gospels report that some of the tombs were shaken open and people were raised from the dead. The whole fabric of reality was shaken by Jesus' death. And people were actually resurrected. Now, this isn't the permanent resurrection when Jesus returns kind of thing. It's more like Lazarus' resurrection. They would die again. But still, it was a miracle that kind of happened after the fact, after he died. Again, showing that this was not a normal thing. This was not an explanation that could be understood through natural processes. Now, the followers of Jesus only have a few hours, and the Roman soldiers have the issue too. They, of course, would have been given the directive that all the bodies had to be removed from the cross before 6 p.m. because the Jewish Sabbath is getting ready to start. 6 p.m. Friday through 6 p.m. Saturday is the Sabbath. And the Jews didn't want any bodies hanging on crosses for their Sabbath, especially this is a high holy Sabbath with the Passover. So what happens is the Roman soldiers actually take heavy cudgels and break the legs of the two other men on the cross so that they can no longer lift themselves up to breathe, and they asphyxiate. But when they come to Jesus, he's already dead. And so they don't have to break any bones, and that fulfills the Old Testament prophecy that no bones were broken. But they want to verify the fact that he actually was dead, so they take a spear and pierce his side, and we're told that blood and water came out. There are medical reasons for all of that. And that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he absolutely was dead. This whole theory that Jesus was still alive when they took him down off the cross is bunk. He was dead. But now his followers have a difficult task because they only have a couple hours left before the Sabbath starts, and they cannot do any work. So his body is removed from the cross, and he's hastily prepared to be put into a tomb because the Jews want to bury their dead the same day they die. It's not like our modern traditions where we've got, viewings and funeral services that might be later on and so on and so forth. They didn't embalm like the Egyptians did. So Joseph of Arimathea, who is a member of the council, hurriedly goes to Pilate and asks for permission to take Jesus' body. He's granted that permission. And then his body is transferred to a tomb that he owns. And they hastily prepared him. They didn't have time to do it properly because the Sabbath is getting ready to start. And this is important because that helps to understand why they show up on Sunday morning to finish the job they didn't have time to do before the Sabbath started. So they managed to get Jesus into the tomb before the Sabbath started. Pilate is visited by the Jewish leaders who say, look, we hear that there's a rumor that his disciples are going to steal the body so they can tell everybody he's raised from the dead. Pilate doesn't want the mess, so he says, all right, I'll put a contingent of Roman soldiers there. we will seal up the tomb with a heavy stone, and the soldiers will guard it so nobody will get in to be able to do anything with the body. And that's the end of the day on Friday. That's Good Friday. We will pick this story up, of course. Tomorrow is Saturday. Saturday was again a smaller event day because it was the Sabbath. But we'll get into that tomorrow with the devotional for that, because we're going to see this all the way through to Easter Sunday morning. Well, thank you for listening to this. I hope we gave you some information that maybe you weren't as aware of with Good Friday. There's tons more we could talk about. It's been one of the most researched cases, the most researched deaths, the most researched executions in all of human history. And all of it points to the veracity of the Bible and the fact that Jesus truly was who he said he was. He truly did die. And then, of course, he truly did raise from the dead. So I pray that your Good Friday is going well for you. Just remind yourself of what Jesus did for you on this day. Because it wouldn't have mattered if you were the only person in the world who was a sinner. Any one of us. He still would have done exactly what he did because of his great love for us. His salvation, although it touches anybody who will receive him, was not done collectively, just I'm going to do this for everybody, so everybody gets kind of sprinkled with the results. It was individual. I'm going to do it for you, and 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 I'm going to do, to anybody who wants it. There is nobody whose sin is too great to be beyond that forgiveness, and there is nobody who doesn't need that forgiveness, because we are all sinners. Okay, thank you again for watching this series, and we'll come back to you with our Saturday devotional tomorrow.